Welcome to our workshop on building your professional resume. Our presenter is Human Resources Coordinator from San Diego County Office of Education, Jessica Glover. Jessica, thank you so much for joining us.
Connie, thank you so much for having me. I just wanted to say thank you to Connie and Nikki and Jana and the rest of the teacher effectiveness team for inviting me in to talk to you. It's always a real pleasure to talk to people that are entering the profession in teaching and sort of get to know you and maybe help you along the way if the things that I have to say are helpful. So let me share my screen. And we are here to talk about resume building. So my name is Jessica Glover, and I am a human resources project specialist. I've been in the human resources field for about 21 years now. And just to give you a little history on my background, I started at New Alternatives here in San Diego a long time ago as a mental health caseworker. I then became a human resources manager for one of the small non-public schools that our students and children participated in as a New Alternatives staff member. And then I came to the county office in human resources, and I've been doing recruitments for the county office for about 15 years now, both certificated teachers and classified non-teaching staff. And, you know, it's a real thrill to work in the educational field for the county office. So the next screen, let's see. There we go. So we have a couple of outcomes that from tonight's presentation. I want to go through an understanding of the different types of resume formats that might for you and help you to understand what the components are of those formats and how you can alter them to tailor your resume for a specific employment opportunity. I want to talk to you about how to showcase all the hard work you've done in your educational program so that it really reflects the hard work you've put into your education, your skills, your achievements. And we also want to talk about how to personalize those things for individual job opportunities and individual hiring managers. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to start with a little exercise. And I want you to imagine that you are a hiring manager in this case. Your task is to hire an accountant from a list of 3 candidates. And I'm going to show you 3 resumes for this accounting positions. We're going to look at them for only 20 seconds at a time. So keeping it honest, I've got my timer here. And then after we go through each of the 3 resumes, we'll come back to the screen and talk about it a little bit. So ready? Here we go. Here's resume number 1. Take a look. Okay, here's resume number 2. And last but not least, resume number 3. All right, that's all you get. So we've looked at 3 resumes. Using the chat feature on the side, does anybody want to tell me which resume they would pick to hire for an accountant? Resume number 3 seems to be the winner. Now, we looked at those resumes for 20 seconds. Would it surprise you to know that SHRM, the Society for Human Resources Management, has done research on that? And in the private and public together, resumes get looked at for an average of 6 seconds. 6 seconds by a hiring manager before a decision is made to move them into a yes pile or a no pile. in government service, it is a little bit different. We have an obligation to really determine and read through these resumes to make sure that somebody is qualified or not qualified for government service. But even in public education, time matters, where you place your information matters, and you want to be able to write a resume that grabs somebody in that average of 6 seconds that they have to review and make sure that you get into that yes pile. Usually in a more back and forth format, we talk about whether it's ethical to treat resumes this way. And whether it's ethical or not, it seems to be the reality, particularly in private industry. And so you need to work with that reality and tailor your resume to get that attention. So I'm going to jet past these 3 resumes here. They will be in your slide packet. So if you want to look at these resumes a little further, you can do that after the talk. So, what is a resume? Resume isn't anything that encaptures everything you've ever done. It's really a snapshot of who you are at a particular moment in time. And I use that word snapshot for a reason, because a resume is really a living, breathing document. It changes just as you change, as you gain more experience. And so it's really a snapshot of who you are at that moment that you're applying for a particular position. It's just an introduction, a teaser, if you will, to get that hiring manager interested in you and to try and get you in the door for a more comprehensive process, usually an interview, to get to know you. But it's also a really important place for them to understand who you are, what your passions are, and you have the ability to communicate some of that individuality and that passion in your resume by the things that you put in there. So we're going to talk about that tonight. There are different types of resume formats, and we're going to focus on the first 2 primarily, chronological and functional skills based. Which one is better for you kind of depends where you are in your career and what kind of background coming into the position. So a chronological resume is sort of the traditional resume that you might think of. It lists your work experience in reversed chronological format, right, with most recent on the top. The main emphasis is on your work history and the titles that you've held at a variety of different companies. And this is really useful in a lot of ways. It's really useful when you've had a very standard, consistent work history with a list of ascending roles that build upon each other, that you've moved up in responsibility, from one position to another. You've stayed in the same field. It really, shows that progression. And especially when your most important achievements or your areas of greatest responsibility have happened recently, that all lends itself to a chronological resume, and you might choose to do that. On the next slide, and I hope it's not too hard for you to see, but I picked a resume that would be really demonstrative of the things that I talked about. This person has a bachelor's in communication and a master's in journalism, which all build upon each other. Their first job was a copy editor. The next one was a managing editor, and finally now they're editor-in-chief. And so you can really sort of see the progression of roles and how this all ties together. And that's what a chronological resume does. However, you might choose to write a functional or a skills-based resume. And this groups your qualifications around skill sets, highlights areas that you choose that are your major areas of accomplishment and strengths. And this really might be a more appropriate format for you in a couple of situations. People who are changing careers or re-entering the job market after an absence. In a chronological resume, that absence or that changing career is really highlighted. You can really see that somebody changed their mind and is doing something different or starting in a new field. And you may not want to do that. Maybe you have larger frequent gaps in employment, you raising a family, which is a wonderful thing to do, but you don't always want to have to explain to every employer or every hiring manager what your motivations were. Or if you've had a different type of work history, you've been, a firefighter, and then you've moved over to another field and now you're here in teaching. So in those types of situations, we want to take the skills that are universal and that are transferable maybe across all of those different things and try and highlight those skill sets so that we can show that you are building upon your skills. It just may be from a variety of different positions or different jobs. And like I said, for a skills-based resume, even if you're at the start of your teaching career, you certainly can list a lot of information. You can talk about your internship and the experiences that you've had there, practicum experience. You can use your evaluations from your student teaching or your practicum and insert those quotes and really build up your skill set in those types of resumes. So we've got another example for you right after this one. Oops. And this is a skills-based resume, you can see. This person has sort of taken this valuable real estate area up here and listed their core competencies that maybe transcended the different things that they had to do. They did list some of their employment history way down here. And you can see that they did that because they've done different things. Forestry technician, crew member, and it might not be immediately obvious how these things build upon each other or tie together. But when you start looking up here and this person's listed the competencies that go across these things, it starts to make a little bit more sense. Project management skills from their different careers. They've picked up land development, different things that you can choose to highlight and let an employer know that you have these skills and that you're ready to bring them to a new situation. And then there's also the combination resume. And really this just means that you've done an employment history and a skill set. Sometimes, when it's very obvious on how your jobs relate to how the competencies relate to each other, sometimes this is the best thing because you can provide the documentation of both of those sets of informations. And so this is one where you can see that the experience is a little bit more prominent than it was in just the functional based resume. They've taken the time to really, talk about inside and outside skills, which sort of are the skill sets that transcend over the different positions that they've had. So I think that everyone's situation is a little bit different and you might have to choose the resume format that works for you. But when you choose that right format, it really allows you to shine in ways that just a traditional chronological resume might not. So next, we want to kind of go through the resume components and talk about each of them so that you know how you can turn them to your best advantage. And the first is generally the heading. This is a very traditional part that we've all seen of the resume, containing your name, your address, your phone number, and other contact information. Something new that I'm seeing is that we are starting to get resumes without addresses on them. Using the chat function, can anybody guess a reason why somebody might not want to put a resume, or might not want to put their address on a resume? Any guesses? I see bias. That's certainly true. Any other guesses? Privacy reasons? Absolutely. Don't live, Lisa, I think you're trying to say don't live close by. Yeah, and that is sort of the main reason that I hear from people. They're applying for a job perhaps in Chula Vista Elementary School District, but they live in Temecula. And they're a little concerned that their hiring manager is just going to think that they are unreliable or unable to get to work on time. And that's certainly not something that we want to make our hiring decisions upon. People have all kinds of reasons why they might want to take a job in a particular area. They may not even live at the address that they're putting on the resume. It might be their mailing address. So we do see that tend to come off the resume, but it's really up to you whether you want to include that. What's really important is that whatever you put on here, address, phone number, email, you are obligated to check those things very, very frequently. Some people even list multiple emails, I think thinking that, the more ways to contact, the better, but really it puts an extra burden on them to check all of those things regularly so that they can respond in a timely manner. One note about resume security is that most of the time, certainly in the educational field, you're submitting your resume in a private way. If you are applying through EdJoin, your resume and attachments are submitted to that particular employer and no one else can see them. But there are other situations where you might be posting your resume in a more public environment. I know some university job boards have public resume postings. LinkedIn sometimes have public resume postings. So you probably do want to have an understanding of where your resume is going. And if it's going to be posted in one of those very public environments, you probably want to remove your contact information so that that protected information is not out there in the world to see. And oh, the other thing I wanted to say, you would want to check your resume or your email address. I can't tell you how many resumes I've seen where, you know, hot teacher 111. If you've had that email address since you were in college and it sounded great back then, you might want to just rethink it and make sure that it's still appropriate for the teaching profession. Um, you know, the next section really should be your education section. You guys have worked very hard to get where you are and to complete your courses of study. And you've got impressive items on your resume that hiring managers need to know right up front. Now, there are plenty of other situations where somebody might not want to put their education up front, but because Ed Code governs assignments and what types of jobs you can be considered for, a hiring manager that is looking at a teacher's resume wants to know instantly what your bachelor's degree was in, what your credential is, what its field of authorization is, and any supplemental authorizations you've got. That should be right up front resume right after your contact information, because those are critical bits of information that you don't want a hiring manager to hunt for. If you want to also indicate any certifications or trainings that you want to prominently feature, you can list those right after your education. Certainly things like behavioral intervention type training, any types of diversity and inclusion training, things that relate to making you more an effective teacher, you want to list those right up there as well in that prime real estate section. Next, job objective. This is a little bit more old-fashioned part of the resume. We don't see it as often anymore. However, I think it still has a place because it's somewhere where you can really be an individual and you can show what your particular passion is within the education industry. And so writing a statement of what you're looking for can often help an employer sort of guide you to the right assignment. You know, usually they have multiple assignments available, and the things that make the difference once you have your credential in place and your education are these extra things. The passion that you have for a particular field of study or a particular part of teaching makes a difference. So when you're writing a job objective, I would strongly, strongly recommend that you rewrite it for every new position that you apply for. It should be carefully researched and tailored to fit not only the position that you're applying for, but the school district as well. It's a very good idea to go out to the school district website, look at what their board initiatives are, what's important to them, what are big projects and their big goals over the next couple of years. And if you can align your job objective to those types of things, you've already got a it also demonstrates to the hiring manager that you did your homework and that you researched the position that you're applying for. When you're writing that objective, it's always best to talk about what you can do for that employer, what you bring to the table, and what makes you a better candidate than the person standing next to you, not really what that employer can do for you. So if you look at it that way, I think the job objective is still very modern and still very relevant and an important part of your resume. So then comes a summary of qualifications. This is that bulleted point, right? We want to make it no longer than 3 to 5 bulleted statements. And these are things that if you're just talking about your work history, they might not come up, but yet they are important skills that you want to highlight. Some examples: Any bilingual skills that you have, please prominently feature that kind of information. Hiring managers want to know about that. Special technology skills that you have, definitely want to know about that. Leadership skills, specialized training. Do you have that added autism certification? We want to know, and we want to see it right up there near the top. So again, that valuable real estate, where it's that top third of the resume, where you know that 6 seconds or that 10 seconds, they're definitely going to get to that information, and that's where you want to cluster this. And then the traditional work experience section. If you're going chronological, you're going to be doing reverse chronological order, either the last employers, the last 10 years, what you've got. You definitely don't need to list every job you've ever held, but you do want to list the jobs that are relevant to the position, the ones where you can pull out those core competencies and see how they might relate to the field of teaching or relate to the job that you're applying for. What is required is that you, in a work history section, is that you list your position title. Please take the time to research it and list it accurately, because it does, those shades of differentiation mean something to human resources. So whether you were an adjunct teacher, whether you were a resource teacher, whether, you know, all of those different things matter. So the accurate position title, the name of the company or the school district that you were working for, and dates of employment. And I'm going to skip one bullet. I'm going to say, you know, better than a list of where you're writing out a paragraph, you keep it bulleted and really focus on whatever accomplishments, results that you achieved. If you are in an internship program and you get a commendation of some kind, list it there. If you are effective and they are meeting some goal that you can quantify and list a percentage, list all of that information. We would love to see it. But probably the best information I can get you is that whatever position you're applying for, there is a job description attached to it. My best recommendation is that you take that job description that for the position that you want to get, and you tailor the language of what you've already done to align with what they're looking for in the job description. It shouldn't be too much of a stretch. I'm not looking for you to say you did anything different than what you actually did. But if you know a district is looking for somebody that has experience working with diverse groups of students, and you have that experience, you're going to want to go back and look at the job where you got that experience and literally say the same thing or mirror the language that you're seeing that the district is for. Led a diverse group of students to 100% success rate in whatever it is. Mirroring that job description again, since you took the time to research the position and that you understand the qualities that that hiring manager is looking for, and you're prepared to show how you have those qualities. So be specific. Diversity and inclusion. I could not walk away without talking about diversity and inclusion. This is a very topic. It is a very important topic, near and dear to the hearts of school districts everywhere, and people are having conversations about how to bring in teachers that have the qualities to promote diversity and inclusion for students and staff alike. And I don't think this is a separate thing or a checkbox you check somewhere on the resume. I think this you weave in throughout the resume. So I think you look at your work history or accomplishment or skill set, and you emphasize the things that you know with what they're looking for. And these are the things that most employers tell us that they're looking for when they're looking for diversity and inclusion skills. If you are multilingual, please let them know. That is one of the strongest way to build community and acceptance, especially among students of diverse backgrounds. So if you have that skill set, definitely you'll want to list that both in your competencies, and you'll also want to weave it into your work history below. If you have previous experience working with diverse teams, and when I say diverse teams, I mean international teams, teams from different parts of the country, teams that welcome in international people here to the United States. You're going to want to weave that in there. It shows an ability to get along and work with people from differing backgrounds than yourself. And that is one of those 21st century skill sets that's only going to increase in importance from here out. Volunteer or committee work typically might not be something that you weave into your resume. But what we're seeing these days is that people really want to emphasize how they are part of the solutions for the problems that our society are facing. So a willingness to sort of roll up your sleeves and become part of the work to make sure that the underserved are being served is always a good thing to illustrate. So if you can weave that in, or even you can list volunteer work in that core competency section, I think that that is a good thing to do. Of course, any trainings or professional development, and so many of us are being asked and being provided with the opportunity for professional development related to diversity and inclusion. You should highlight that. That is always something an employer wants to see. And this one's just food for thought. You know, part of the conversations that are happening in human resources, sorry, a little bit of an ambulance going by. Part of the conversation is how we can reach out to a applicant pool and remove bias. And one of the conversations and the trends that we're seeing is people are considering blind hiring for the future. What that means is employers are talking about stripping off identifying information from resumes, names, certainly university titles, addresses, things like that, that could give away clues to someone's background and identity, and doing the screening literally just based on the employment history or the skill set that people are presenting. And then only later in the process, when they're at an interview stage, revealing more information about that candidate. So I think what that means is that it even puts more emphasis that your resume should be well written and really reflective of your accomplishments. We'll see where that goes. This is sort of in the beginning stages right now of how it's going to impact hiring, but it's definitely a trend that we're hearing about. Some don'ts for you on the resume. You don't need to list your interests and hobbies unless they're relevant to the position, and that will be based on the research you do for the position in the district. If you were a chess champion, that might be relevant. They may be looking for people to promote that kind of work. But if you were the Atari Nintendo champion of 1984 with the highest score in Joust, maybe not so relevant for your resume. No personal pronouns. Again, don't include any protected information. And of course, protected information in hiring is anything personal about your height, your weight, your age, date of birth, place of birth, all of the things that are listed here. We are seeing a little bit of a trend of people attaching pictures to their resumes again. I definitely don't recommend that in the field of teaching. Really, you know, your strongest information is your training, education, and background experience. And so we don't want to make it any harder for an employer to be unbiased. And then again, don't ever falsify information. A lot of times it's an unintentional falsification, particularly around job titles. People don't always have a full understanding of what their exact job title was. But in the case scenarios where it comes back to bite you, I typically see it comes back to bite people 3 or 4 years later after they're hired, often when they're up for a promotion to an even higher level of responsibility, and then the information comes out that it wasn't correct in the first place. And these are very heartbreaking situations. So just double check to make sure the information that you're presenting is accurate on your resume. Layout and appearance. Your resume's look is just as important as your content. I think so many of you chose resume 3 from our beginning exercise, and I think with that 20-second review, a lot of that had to look with how it looked more than the content. So some general pointers. 1 or 2 pages, unless you're a graduating university professor with like 12 publications behind you. It really doesn't need to be any longer than that. I think when we get resumes that are 5 and 6 pages longer, sometimes I think people haven't done their homework, or they don't know what we're looking for. They don't know how to focus down to the skill sets that are really needed for the position. Universal fonts with 12-point size. I say universal fonts because so often these days, your resume never makes it to a paper format. It's transferred digitally through EdJoin or through some other medium. And so you don't want to have your resume, because you used a really fancy font, come out unreadable and have that be the reason that you don't get a position. You just want to be consistent with how you lay out, underlining, capitalizing, all of those things. You don't want to fill every section of the page. You want to leave some white space, some good margins, and you really want to use bullet points so that you can emphasize the nuggets of information that you want. Spell and grammar check is underlined. I can't tell you how many assistant soups have told me that the minute they see a spelling mistake or something like that, that resume just goes into a different pile. It's so easy to do a spell and grammar check these days. We just want you to do that extremely consistently. I wanted to show you this resume, and in the chat function, what are your impressions of this resume? Messy, meh, wordy. What? There's bullet points. There's clearly labeled objective and a summary, software knowledge. Overwhelming. And I agree with you. I think this is not a great resume, and they didn't use their spacing appropriately here. I think because everything's clustered. Yeah, I don't like that it's centered down the middle. It really just doesn't break apart the information, and your eye just gets tired. I included this because this person has some wonderful information in this resume, but look at the reaction. Just from the way it's formatted, it's kind of a turnoff and hard to read. So digital formatting, I wanted to talk about this. It's a point of pride for the county office. We do not use any kind of applicant tracking or digital reader system that scans our resumes. A human recruiter looks at every single resume, but we know out there that applicant tracking systems are ever increasing. Artificial intelligence is here to stay in the field of recruiting. And it's becoming also part of that conversation about bias and diversity, that there are some benefits to having some artificial intelligence review resumes. So just some pointers in case you are going to submit to somewhere that might use a digital or an applicant tracking system. You don't want to be too fancy. Most applicant tracking system takes that digital scan and converts it to another format anyway. So, hours that you spent aligning this and that and making it look all swirly and fancy, that's going to be totally lost on an applicant tracking system. Again, use those universal fonts because when it gets converted, if it's a font it doesn't recognize, it's going to completely blow out the applicant tracking system, and you don't want that. A time saver, once you have your resume the way you want it to be, you might want to save it in several file types, because these systems all usually require something different. I know EdJoin focuses on PDF. Some of them accept text files, some of them accept Word doc files. So by having it ready to go in several different formats, you might save yourself time, especially if you've got an application deadline that you're facing. For these applicant tracking systems, they don't read tables. They get thrown off by funky graphics and logos and things like that. If you know you're submitting somewhere that's using one of these systems, you just want to avoid those things so that the information on your resume feeds into that system and does it well. And again, almost more critical for an applicant tracking system, by pulling keywords and language from the job description that you're applying for into your resume. Those systems are trained to look for specific words and specific skill sets, And by taking the time to do that, you greatly increase your chances that your resume will be selected for further interviewing. So, all this information, where to begin? I've said it twice, I'm going to say it a third time. Start by getting the job description for the position to which you are applying. That job description is a wealth of information and should be your guidepost, not only for the job duties and the education and experience, but most job description also lists a section called knowledge, skills, and abilities. This is where you want to pull language from to build out your previous experience and your competency section. The more alignment you have on your resume with things from the district or things from language from where you're applying, the more chance you have of getting in the door. You also want to think, what do you want to emphasize most about yourself in your teaching career? Are you brand new to education? Is this the first job you've had out of college? You're going to make some different decisions than if you've been a forest engineer, right? Environmental engineer in the forest for the last 15 years, and you're changing professions and bringing that skill set to teaching. That'll probably have a little bit of a different resume. If you are doing a career change like that, think about those transferable skills, really important. It sometimes takes a little bit of creativity to see how they might apply from one field to the other, but they are there, I promise you. And then get started with choosing a format and laying out your basic resume and filling in the blanks in between. After that, write, rewrite, and definitely ask other people to read it. A resume is a very personal document, and I know after I get into mine for a while, I'm not seeing it objectively anymore. So I always recommend you have at least 2 other people take a look at your resume to give you feedback. Be open to that feedback. Often what somebody else sees in your resume, a hiring manager would too. So even though you know in your head what you intended or what you want the effect to be, if your friend is telling you it's not coming off that way, there's something to look back at your resume. Again, rewrite it based on every job that you're applying for, and it is that living document. It's never finished. What you got on your resume now at an intern should be different if you apply for another job and you have 2 years of teaching behind you. It's just a lifelong process as long as you're in the workforce. So I want to thank you. I really appreciate the time that you've given me to listen. And any questions in the chat, or Connie, any questions that came in any other way?
Yes, Jessica, thank you. So
Of
for
course.
question, what is your recommendation for job experience that is relevant but more than 10 years ago? Also, if it has been long enough ago that you don't remember the exact dates of employment.
So I think that even if it was 10 years ago, and in a chronological resume, right, that would normally have sort of dropped off down here at the bottom. But especially if you're doing the functional resume or you have applicable skill sets, you should include it. Somebody will want to know that you have a good background, even if it was 10 years ago, in another area that could be applied to education.
That's great. Thank you. Someone else asked, should we now include if we have been vaccinated for COVID?
I'm going to have to say no on that. That is protected information that's covered under the HIPAA Act. It is considered private. I think that the COVID situation is not over. The requirements for employers are not set. We don't know exactly where that's going yet. And so until and unless we have a clearer picture of that, I would recommend that you do not put that on your resume.
Wonderful. Thank you. Here's another. I have come across the letter of interest as part of application. How is this different from a cover letter?
It is really, for all intents and purposes, the same as a cover letter. The letter of interest or the cover letter is a place for you to be a little bit more personal, a little bit more individualized. With that resume, you're laser focused on bullet points and sound bites. You want to transmit as much quick information in a short period of time as you can. The cover letter or the letter of interest is something that's generally read once that initial yes/no pile decision has been made. It's sort of a supplemental attachment that after we read the resume, we look at the letter of introduction to get a little bit better sense of who this person is and what their individuality is. And so I would look at it as sort of a secondary document to the resume to sort of introduce yourself as a person.
Wonderful. So it's similar to a cover letter. It's just called a letter of interest.
You'll see it called different things. Some agencies call it a letter of introduction, a letter of interest, cover letter, but they're all essentially the same.
Thank you. And in that letter, the second part of this question is, what do hiring managers look for that are specific to the field of education? For example, philosophy of education.
I would say the number one thing a hiring manager wants to know is what credential you have, what it authorizes, and any supplementary authorizations you have. That is the very first thing that they want to know. Of course, they want to know you have a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, but that is sort of implied, right? You have to have a bachelor's degree to get a teaching credential. And, there are so many positions and they need to make those quick decisions about what bucket you go into. Leading with your credential information is always most important.
Thank you. And then your philosophy of education, or what you care about as an educator, is in fact articulated through a cover letter many times.
I think that that's absolutely true. I think that it can also be communicated in the resume, but it's in a much shorter, more bulleted format. And so I think that the two really need to align. Once you have your resume in place, you'll be writing that cover letter, and I would definitely have those two things open together to make sure there's an alignment between the two.
Thank you. And a final question, Jessica. Should references be included on the resume itself or only attach them in the application when applying?
I've definitely seen it both ways. I think it's fine to include them in a resume, but the mistake I see people making is using the same three references for every apply for. And I think your references need to be customized just as much as any of the other information. Make sure that the people that you're listing there can talk about the skill sets that you're featuring on this individual resume. So I think as long as you're looking at it from that lens, it's fine to include on your resume.
Thank you. And for those of you who asked other questions, the ones that we haven't read out loud are actually more appropriate for the next panel. So we're going to save those. Jessica, we thank you. Every time I hear you speak, you have so much knowledge on this topic, and we're so grateful.
Oh, you're so sweet. Well, it's really an honor for you guys to invite me in. We need great educators, and this internship program, is a great foundation for everyone to be a great educator. I'm happy to contribute.